At 2 a.m., the emergency doors of Houston Memorial Hospital explode open, and what walks through them is not a tragedy. It is a lie wearing the face of grief. A pregnant woman, unconscious and bleeding, is rushed in on a stretcher, standing beside her, her husband, calm, polished, already talking. Night shift nurse Elara Voss watches him from across the room and feels something cold move through her chest. She has seen husbands cry. She has seen husbands collapse. This man is doing neither. He is performing, and nobody in that room seems to notice. Except her. If you've ever watched someone in power lie straight to a room full of people and get away with it, stay with me. Drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this story has traveled. Hit that like button, and let's begin. The call came in at 1:47 a.m. Elara Voss was standing at the nurse's station on the third floor, filling out incident reports from the previous shift when the radio crackled and the ER-charged nurse's voice came through tight and clipped. Unconscious female, approximately 32 weeks pregnant, possible head trauma. BP dropping, ETA 4 minutes. Elara set down her pen. She had been a night shift nurse for 11 years. She had worked holidays, back-to-back doubles, and understaffed weekends when the floor was held together by 2 nurses and a prayer. She had seen enough emergencies to know that the ones that announced themselves quietly were usually the ones that left marks. She took the elevator down. The ER doors blew open at 1:51 a.m., and the paramedics came through fast, pushing the gurney with the practiced urgency of people who have already made the calculations and don't like the numbers. Elara positioned herself at the edge of the receiving team, watching the woman's face as they wheeled her past. She was young, late 20s, maybe 30. Dark hair spread across the pillow, skin pale enough that the bruising on her left jaw stood out like something painted on. Her belly pressed against the hospital gown, full, round, alive with a child she was not currently conscious enough to protect. Elara's eyes moved to the husband. He came through the doors 2 steps behind the gurney, and that was the first thing she noted. 2 steps. Not 1. Not right there. Hand gripping the rail, leaning over her face and saying her name the way terrified people do. 2 steps behind, like a man who had remembered to follow at the last moment. He was tall, suit jacket, open collar, no tie, the kind of untidy that still managed to look expensive. Dark hair, clean jaw, eyes that moved around the ER with the calm of someone assessing a room rather than searching for help. He looked like a man who had been in important rooms his entire life and had learned to make every room feel like it belonged to him. A nurse Elara didn't recognize, new hire, second week on the floor, stepped forward and began asking him questions. He answered smoothly. Pregnancy complications. Severe anemia. She had been having dizzy spells for weeks, he said. They had an appointment with her OB scheduled for Monday. He had come home to find her on the kitchen floor. He said all of it in the tone of a man reciting a prepared statement. Elara watched his hands. They were still, completely still. He stood with one hand in his jacket pocket and the other resting open at his side, and neither of them moved once. Not a single tremor, no nervous ringing, no reaching for his phone, no running fingers through his hair, no unconscious touching of his own face the way people do when they are frightened and their bodies don't know what to do with the energy. She had seen husbands come through those doors. She had seen them fall apart. She had seen them go gray and quiet in the particular way men did when they were holding themselves together because they believed falling apart would be a failure. She had seen anger, confusion, guilt, the deep animal panic of a person who might be about to lose someone they loved. This man looked like none of those things. He looked like he was waiting. The attending physician, Dr. Harlan Reyes, a compact man with reading glasses perpetually pushed up on his forehead, moved quickly through the initial assessment while Elara assisted on the left side of the bed. She pulled back the hospital gown to attach monitoring leads and stopped for a moment that lasted less than 2 seconds, long enough to see and short enough that nobody noticed she had paused. The bruising on the woman's left forearm was not new. It was not the yellowed spread of an old injury or the clean darkness of something that had happened tonight. It existed in layers, a fading green-brown beneath a sharper purple-blue, one sitting on top of the other the way paint sits on a wall that has been painted twice. The outer bruise was recent, 2, maybe 3 days. The one beneath it was older by at least a week. Alara attached the leads and said nothing. Dr. Reyes ran through the standard assessment. Pupils reactive. Fetal heartbeat strong, which was something. The head wound was real. A laceration above the left temple, consistent with a fall, consistent with striking a hard edge, consistent with many things. Alara excused herself quietly and walked to the small supply room off the corridor, where she kept her personal bag in the bottom locker. She pulled out the small black notebook she had carried since her second year of nursing, the one she used for personal observations, things that didn't belong in official charts, but that she couldn't let herself forget. She uncapped a pen and wrote the time, the patient's name from the intake form, and a single line. Layered bruising, L forearm, new over old. Husband, controlled presentation, no physical distress response. She put the notebook back. She returned to the floor. The woman's name, she learned from the intake paperwork, was Serena Whitmore. The husband was Adrian Whitmore, attorney, partner at Whitmore and Crane, a firm whose name Alara recognized from the donor plaques in the hospital lobby, from the new cardiac wing that had opened 18 months ago, from the gala photos that appeared every fall in the Houston business section. Adrian Whitmore was, by any practical measure, one of the most important men in the hospital's financial ecosystem. This information reached Alara the way most important information reached her, not announced, but assembled, piece by piece, from what she heard in corridors and what she saw in people's faces when his name was spoken. She watched Dr. Reyes adjust his posture slightly when the ER administrator came to the floor and whispered something to him. She watched the administrator then walk over to Adrian Whitmore and shake his hand. She watched Adrian nod, calm and unhurried, the way people nod when they have already made certain the outcome will be agreeable. She kept working. By 3:15 a.m., Serena Whitmore had been stabilized and moved to a private room on the maternity floor. The baby's vitals were holding steady. The head wound had been cleaned and closed. Whatever storm had brought her through those doors had been managed, measured, and filed. Adrian Whitmore sat in a chair outside Serena's room with a cup of coffee someone had brought him. He was on his phone, typing, not calling. Alara walked the corridor past him twice. The third time, she stopped at the nurse's station closest to Serena's room and pulled up the patient chart on the terminal. She was authorized. Serena was technically in her care as part of the rotation, and she moved through the records with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done it 10,000 times. What she did not find was the record of a previous wrist injury that should have been there. Serena Whitmore was a patient of Houston Memorial. She had a medical history on file. 3 prenatal visits, an allergy notation, standard blood work. But when Alara cross-referenced the chart with the patient's full history, there was a gap. A visit 14 months ago, documented only as a general consultation with no follow-up notes, no imaging record, no treatment summary. The visit existed, but everything inside it was hollow. Alara wrote that down, too. She was making her third entry in the notebook when she heard footsteps that were too deliberate for 3:30 in the morning, and she looked up to find a woman standing at the end of the corridor who had not been there a moment before. The woman was perhaps 40, wearing a charcoal blazer over a silk blouse despite the hour, with the particular posture of someone who had learned that arriving looking pressed and composed was itself a form of power. She had a leather portfolio under one arm and a phone in her other hand, and she was scanning the floor the same way Adrian had scanned the ER. Assessing, not searching. She walked straight to the nurse's station. "I'm here regarding Mrs. Whitmore," she said. Her voice was even, professional, with the kind of careful enunciation that came from years of choosing words as tools. "Victoria Hale. I'm Mr. Whitmore's assistant. He asked me to coordinate with the administrative team regarding Mrs. Whitmore's care arrangements." The overnight charge nurse, a broad-shouldered man named Danny, who had been on the floor for 8 years and had never once been successfully intimidated, looked up from his own paperwork. "Visiting hours start at 8, he said. "I'm not here as a visitor," Victoria said. "I'm here to handle some administrative coordination, nothing that affects your team's work." "Everything on this floor affects my team's work," Danny said pleasantly. Victoria held his gaze for a moment, then shifted her attention to the phone in her hand and made a call without excusing herself. She spoke briefly, quietly, turned away so the words were inaudible, and then put the phone back in her pocket and looked at Danny with an expression that had sharpened slightly. "I'll wait," she said. She sat down in the family waiting area at the end of the corridor and opened her portfolio and began writing. Alara, who had been at the terminal 6 feet away for the entire exchange, did not look up. She finished her notation, closed the notebook, and returned to her rounds. At 4:10 a.m., the hospital's overnight administrator, a mild man named Gerald, who seemed to exist in a permanent state of apology, appeared on the floor and spent 12 minutes in conversation with Victoria Hale. When he left, he stopped at the nurse's station and spoke to Danny in a low voice. Danny's expression did not change, but the tension that moved through his jaw said enough. Alara found out what was said 20 minutes later when Danny pulled her into the supply room and shut the door with a quiet click. "They want a revised documentation protocol on the Whitmore case," he said. "All nursing notes go through the attending before they're finalized. Nothing gets added to the chart without Reyes signing off first." Alara looked at him. "That's not standard procedure," she said. "No," Danny agreed. "It's not. Who authorized it?" "Gerald, acting on a request from the hospital board, apparently, or a member of it." He paused. "Whitmore is on the board." Alara said nothing for a moment. She was thinking about the layered bruising. She was thinking about the hollow chart entry from 14 months ago. She was thinking about the way Adrian Whitmore had stood with one hand in his pocket while his pregnant wife was intubated 6 feet away. "Is the order in writing?" she asked. "Not yet," Danny said. "Gerald's drafting it." "Then, until it is," Alara said, "I'm going to keep doing my job exactly the way I've been doing it." Danny looked at her for a long moment. He was not a man who gave approval easily. He mostly communicated through the absence of disapproval, but something in his face shifted slightly. "All right," he said. "Watch your back." He left. She stayed in the supply room for 45 seconds, her hand flat on the shelf in front of her, breathing. She was not afraid. That was the strange part. She knew she should be. She was a night shift nurse with 11 years of seniority and 0 political capital, and she was quietly documenting evidence against the man whose name was on the cardiac wing. But what she felt instead of fear was something closer to clarity, a narrowing. The feeling she got when everything complicated fell away and left only the immediate, essential thing. Serena Whitmore was in that room. She was 32 weeks pregnant. She had bruises stacked on top of bruises, and nobody with any power was asking the right questions. Alara picked up her notebook and went back to work. It was at 5:40 a.m. that she saw the man. She was charting at the station nearest Serena's room when she heard the elevator and looked up by instinct. The man who stepped off was not Adrian Whitmore, and he was not anyone on the hospital's staff. He was somewhere in his mid-30s, broad across the shoulders, wearing dark clothing that managed to be expensive without being formal. He moved through the corridor with the particular economy of someone who had trained himself to take up exactly as much space as he chose, and no more. 2 men came off the elevator behind him. They stayed near the elevator doors. The first man walked to the nurse's station and stopped. He looked at Alara. She looked back. "Serena Whitmore," he said. Not a question. "Are you family?" Alara asked. "Brother," he said. She studied him for a moment, the jaw, the coloring. It was there, beneath the differences. He was darker, sharper, carrying something in his posture that Serena's hospital gown stillness did not carry, but the structure of the face was recognizable. "She's stable," Alara said, "resting." "I want to see her." "She's unconscious. She needs rest." Alara paused. "And visiting hours start at 8. Something moved behind his eyes. Not anger exactly, controlled frustration. The look of a man who was not accustomed to being told what he could and couldn't do, and who was deciding, in real time, how to respond to this particular instance of it. "I'm her brother," he said again. "I heard you the first time," Alara said. "It doesn't change what she needs right now." He held her gaze. She held his. "What happened to her?" he asked. "That's a question you should ask the attending physician," she said. "His name is Dr. Reyes. He'll be back on the floor at 7. The man's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He looked past her, toward the closed door of Serena's room. Then he looked back. "Are you the nurse assigned to her?" "Yes." Then I'm asking you. Alara set down her pen. She thought about Danny's warning. She thought about Gerald and the protocol that was being drafted. She thought about Victoria Hale sitting in the waiting area with her leather portfolio at 4 in the morning. She thought about the name on the cardiac wing. I can tell you she's being monitored, Alara said. I can tell you the baby's vitals are stable. I can tell you that everyone on this floor is doing their job. She paused. What I can't tell you is everything I think you should know. Not yet. The man stared at her. Not yet, he repeated slowly. Come back at 7, she said. Talk to the doctor. And then, she stopped. She made a decision in the space of a breath. And then come find me. She picked up her pen and went back to her charting. The man stood at the nurse's station for another 3 seconds. Then he turned and walked back toward the elevator where his 2 associates were waiting. He did not look back. Alara did not watch him go. She already knew who he was by then. She had seen enough to make the connections. The way the 2 men near the elevator had arranged themselves. The way the corridor had shifted when he stepped into it. The particular quality of stillness in the nurses and orderlies who had been watching from a distance. The way even Danny, who feared nothing, had straightened slightly when the elevator doors opened. Damien Cross. She didn't know the name yet. Not precisely, not attached to its full weight. She would by morning. But she knew the type. She had grown up in a neighborhood where that type came in and out of her mother's diner and paid in cash and never started trouble but ended it. And she had learned before she was 12 that the most dangerous men were not the ones who threatened loudly. They were the ones who came in quiet. What she did not know, what none of them knew in those suspended hours before dawn, was that the man sitting outside Serena Whitmore's room with a cup of coffee and a phone was already making calculations about what would need to disappear. Or that by the time the sun came up over Houston, the evidence she had been quietly assembling in a small black notebook would be the only honest record of what had happened inside that hospital room. Or that one of those calculations involved her. She pulled out the notebook and added a final entry for the shift. 5:40 a.m. Brother arrived. Name unknown. Floor personnel response suggests significant profile. Will return at 700. Adrian Whitmore still present. Has not entered patient room since 3 a.m. Has not asked for update from nursing staff in over 2 hours. She underlined the last line, capped the pen, and sat very still in the gray light of the corridor while the hospital breathed around her, and somewhere down the hall, behind a closed door, a woman with layered bruises and a child in her belly lay unconscious, and 2 men who each believed they owned some part of her future were already moving their pieces into place. The sun came up over Houston at 6:47 a.m., and it did not care about any of them. Alara had been on her feet for 9 hours. She had eaten half a granola bar at 4 a.m. and a cup of coffee that had gone cold before she finished it, and her lower back had developed a specific ache that lived just left of center, the kind that built itself brick by brick across a long shift, and then announced itself all at once, somewhere around hour 8. She ignored it the way she ignored most things that tried to slow her down, by simply not granting them her attention. At 6:55 a.m., she checked on Serena Whitmore. The room was dim and still smelled faintly of antiseptic and the particular staleness of recycled hospital air. Serena had not regained consciousness. Her vitals were holding, blood pressure cautiously acceptable. Fetal heart rate steady at 148 beats per minute, which the monitors reported in calm green numbers that seemed almost indecent in their composure, given everything surrounding them. An IV line ran into Serena's right arm. Her left arm lay along the blanket, and Alara's gaze moved to the forearm without her deciding to look there. The bruising had darkened slightly, as bruises always did in the early hours after injury, the color deepening as the blood beneath the skin settled. Alara made her notations. She checked the IV line, checked the fetal monitor leads, checked the door when she left, making sure it latched. Adrian Whitmore was no longer in the chair outside. She scanned the corridor. He was at the far end near the window, speaking quietly into his phone, his back to the floor. His jacket was still on. His posture was still correct. 6 hours in a hospital waiting to hear whether his pregnant wife would recover, and the man looked like he had come from a meeting. Alara went to the nurse's station and found Danny finishing his shift documentation. "Has he been in to see her?" she asked, tilting her head toward the corridor window. "Once," Danny said without looking up. "Around 5. Spent maybe 4 minutes inside. Did you log it? I logged the visit, not the duration. He paused. Should I have? Alora thought about the protocol Gerald was drafting. She thought about the notation she had made at 3 a.m. She thought about the fact that Adrian Whitmore had not asked a single nurse for a patient update in over 2 hours, which was a behavior so contrary to what she had observed in 11 years of caring for pregnant women's families that it registered as its own kind of evidence. Yes, she said. Going forward, log duration. Danny looked up then. He studied her face for a moment with the evaluating expression of a man deciding how far out on a limb he was willing to climb. Gerald's memo came through, he said, 20 minutes ago. I know. It's got Rhea's signature on it. She had expected that. Reyes was a good doctor. He was also a practical man who had 2 kids in private school and a mortgage on a house in River Oaks, and had been at Houston Memorial for 16 years. Practical men made practical calculations. Then we follow the protocol, she said, and I keep my own records separately. Ilara, I'm not asking you to do anything, Danny. I'm telling you what I'm doing. He looked at her for another moment, then he went back to his paperwork. Dr. Reyes arrived at 7:08 a.m., earlier than expected, which meant someone had called him. He came off the elevator, moving fast for a man of deliberate habits, and the first thing he did was go directly to Serena's room without stopping at the nurse's station. The second thing he did when he came back out 4 minutes later was look for Ilara. She was already there. Walk with me, he said. They walked to the small conference room at the end of the maternity corridor, and he shut the door. The room had a rectangular table, 6 chairs, a whiteboard with the remnants of a care coordination meeting from the previous week, and a window that looked out over the hospital parking structure. Reyes stood with his back to the window and crossed his arms. You flagged concerns last night, he said. I documented observations, Ilara said. That's my job. Your observations are creating a situation. A situation, she repeated. The hospital has obligations to its patients, Reyes said. It also has obligations to its donors and to its institutional relationships, and right now those things are in tension, and I need to know what exactly you have documented and what you intend to do with it. Ilara looked at him steadily. She had worked under Reyes for 4 years. She respected his clinical judgment. She understood what he was carrying right now, and she did not hold it against him, not exactly. But she also was not going to give him what he was asking for. I have nursing observations related to patient care, she said. That's all. Ilara. His voice dropped. Adrian Whitmore is not someone you want as an enemy. I'm not making enemies, she said. I'm taking notes. He looked at her. The particular exhaustion in his face was not from the early call-in. It was older than that. The memo stands, he said. I understand. Everything goes through me before it hits the chart. I understand. He held her gaze for a moment, looking for something. Capitulation, maybe, or at least visible uncertainty. He didn't find it. All right, he said. He uncrossed his arms. Her pressure is trending better this morning. If the fetal monitors stay clean through the next 4 hours, I'll feel more comfortable about the pregnancy. He moved toward the door. The husband wants a briefing at 9. Will you tell him what I documented? Reyes stopped with his hand on the door handle. I'll tell him what's in the official chart, he said. He left. Ilara stood alone in the conference room for a moment. Through the window, she could see the parking structure's upper level and the gray early light on the concrete, and a single black SUV parked across 2 spaces in a way that suggested the driver had not been concerned about the inconvenience to others. She recognized the vehicle from when it had arrived in the night. She had watched it from the window while making her 5 a.m. notations. She left the conference room and went to find Damian Cross. He was in the family waiting area at the end of the corridor, where the chairs were padded in a tired institutional blue, and there was a table with old magazines and a television mounted to the wall that nobody had turned on. He was sitting with his forearms on his knees, staring at a point on the floor, and the 2 men who had come up with him the previous night were arranged at either end of the room with the automatic positioning of people who did this without thinking about it anymore. When Ilara came around the corner, Damien looked up immediately. The alertness was instantaneous. She noted that. Not someone startled awake. Someone who had not been fully asleep to begin with. He stood up. He was taller than she had clocked him at 5:40 a.m., or maybe it was that in the waiting room light she could see him more completely. The specific kind of physical authority that came not from size alone, but from the absolute absence of physical uncertainty. He moved as if he had never once been surprised by his own body. "You said come find you," he said. "I did. It's been 6 hours. Your sister needed monitoring." Something shifted in his jaw. Not anger, something more unguarded than anger. He caught it and pulled it back. "How is she?" "Stable. The baby is stable." Alara glanced at the two men at either end of the room. "Can we speak privately?" He nodded almost imperceptibly, and the two men walked out to the corridor without being told twice. Alara sat down across the table from him. She set her hands flat on her knees, not on the table. She was not going to show him the notebook. Not yet. "Your sister has injuries that are inconsistent with a single fall," she said. Damien was still. "Meaning what?" he said. It wasn't a question. It was the sound of a man who already understood but was requiring her to say it anyway. "Meaning the bruising on her left forearm has 2 distinct layers. The outer injury is recent, 2 to 3 days. The injury beneath it is older by at least a week." She watched his face. "That kind of bruising pattern doesn't come from fainting." He breathed out through his nose, a slow, controlled breath, the kind that was doing a great deal of invisible work. "What did Adrian tell the doctors?" he asked. "Pregnancy complications, anemia, that she fainted and struck her head when she fell. And the arm?" He hasn't been asked about the arm directly. Damien's eyes moved to the window. He was looking at nothing. He was doing the thing Alara had seen done before. The internal reorganization of a reality someone thought they understood. It was never fast. It never looked clean. "She's been with him 4 years, he said. Quiet. Almost to himself. "I know. I vetted him." His voice had gone flat in a particular way. "Before she married him, I had people look at him. Everything came back clean." Alara said nothing. "I was careful." The word came out with a faint edge on it, like something being tested for weight. "I'm always careful." "People who do what he appears to have done," Alara said carefully, "tend to be careful too. The ones who last are the ones who know what a background check looks for and make sure to keep it out of frame." Damien brought his gaze back to her. He looked at her the way he had looked at her in the night, with the concentrated attention of someone who didn't extend it often and wasn't certain yet whether this was a situation that deserved it. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. "Because someone needs to know." "And the doctors?" "The doctors are working with revised protocols this morning." She said it plainly, without heat. "The hospital has institutional relationships that are creating pressure on what gets officially documented." His expression didn't change, but something in the stillness intensified. "Adrian Tarsamjin," he said. "He's on the board." Damien stood up. He didn't do it explosively. He simply rose from the chair in one controlled motion and walked to the window and put his hand flat on the glass and looked out at the parking structure. His back was to her. His shoulders were perfectly even. "I need to see her," he said. "She's unconscious." "I need to see her anyway." Alara stood. "I'll take you in. 5 minutes. You don't touch anything, you don't move anything, and if a doctor walks in, you let me handle it." He turned from the window. He didn't argue. He nodded once. She led him down the corridor past the nurse's station where Danny was doing a handoff briefing with the day shift charge nurse, and pointedly did not look up when Alara passed with Damien crossed behind her. She opened the door to Serena's room and held it, and he went in. He stopped 2 feet inside the door. He stood there and looked at his sister. The monitors beeped their steady rhythm. The IV line ran its clear feed. Serena's face in the morning light was still and pale and young-looking in the unguarded way that unconscious people always looked young, stripped of every expression they had learned to manage. The bruise along her jaw had continued its overnight development and was now a distinct purple blue that spread toward her temple. Damien Cross stood very still and looked at his sister for a long time. When he turned back to Alara, his face had changed. Not broken. Men like him didn't break, she understood that. But something beneath the surface had shifted in the way bedrock shifted before anyone saw the cracks. Slow. Permanent. "Who knows about this?" he asked. "I do," she said. "Danny, the charge nurse, has seen enough to understand the situation without being told directly. The doctor is aware of my concerns, but is operating under institutional pressure." She paused. "And apparently your sister's husband's assistant, who arrived at 4 this morning with a portfolio and a phone and spent time with hospital administration." "Victoria Hale," Damien said. Alara hadn't expected him to have the name. "You know her?" "She's been Adrian's assistant for 6 years." Something crossed his face. "She's efficient." "She's here to manage the narrative," Alara said. Damien's jaw worked. He looked once more at Serena, at the arm on the blanket, at the bruising that even from the doorway was visible as a map of something wrong. And then he moved past Alara into the corridor. She followed. He was standing with his back against the corridor wall when she came out, his arms crossed over his chest, and when she looked at him, she could see the effort the stillness was costing him. It was in the tendons of his forearms. It was in the particular set of his teeth. "I need to speak with Adrian," he said. "He's down the corridor." "Alone." "That's not something I can arrange," Alara said, "but I also can't stop you." He looked at her. For a moment the mask slipped a fraction, not into vulnerability, but into something harder than the control he had been showing, something that lived underneath the control and didn't come up often. "If he did this," he said, "I will—" "If he did this," Alara said, cutting him off quietly, but without apology. "What matters is what happens to Serena, not what happens to him. Not yet." He stared at her. "Not yet," he said. The same words she had used at the nurse's station 6 hours ago with the same flat emphasis, and she understood he was marking them. "Your sister needs protection," she said. "Legal, medical, documented. That is what gives her options. That is what keeps him from being able to use his position to erase what happened." She held his gaze. "If you go down there and do something that gives him grounds to make you the problem, everything she needs disappears. You understand that?" The corridor was very quiet. He understood it. She could see him understanding it and hating it simultaneously. "All right," he said. It came out rough. "All right." She left him standing against the wall and went to the nurse's station to begin the handoff briefing for the day shift. She was 3 minutes into it when she heard the voices. They came from the far end of the corridor, controlled at first, the particular pitch of men who had been trained in opposite schools of restraint and were meeting each other at the edge of both. She recognized Adrian Whitmore's voice, smooth and measured. She recognized the other voice as the one she had been speaking to for the past 20 minutes. She excused herself from the handoff. By the time she reached the corridor junction, Adrian and Damien were standing 6 feet apart. Adrian still had his coffee. His jacket was still on. He looked, Alara thought, like a man who had been expecting this moment and had spent the night preparing for it. Damien had his hands at his sides. "She's being taken care of," Adrian was saying. "The doctors are optimistic." "What happened to her arm?" Damien said. "The fall." "Her arm, Adrian. The bruising." "She's had circulatory issues throughout the pregnancy. She bruises easily." "There are 2 separate bruises on top of each other," Damien said. His voice was very even. Too even. "One of them is at least a week old." Adrian's expression didn't shift. He took a small sip of his coffee. "I don't know what you think you're seeing," Adrian said, "but I think you should let the medical staff make those determinations. They're qualified. You're not." A small pause. "And frankly, Damien, I'm not sure this level of scrutiny is helpful to Serena right now. She needs rest. She needs stability. She needs answers." "She needs her husband making sure she gets the best care available," Adrian said. "Which is what I'm doing." His eyes moved briefly to Alara, then back. "Is this woman bothering you? Because I can have her reassigned." Damien's head turned slowly toward Alara and then back to Adrian, and the movement was so deliberate and so loaded that even Adrian, for just a fraction of a second, went slightly still. "No," Damien said. "She's not bothering me." "Good," Adrian said. He adjusted his grip on the coffee cup. "Then I think we should all take a breath and focus on what actually matters here." "I am focused on what matters," Damien said. The two men looked at each other across 6 feet of institutional flooring, and the weight in that corridor in that moment was something Alara could feel against her skin. 20 years of history between them, she guessed. Business, family dinners, the accumulated weight of a trust that had been extended in one direction and used as cover in another. She had seen versions of this in smaller rooms, an abuser confronted by someone who was supposed to be safely in their corner, and she knew which way they usually broke. Adrian smiled first, small, composed, almost sorry. "I know this is hard," he said. "It's hard for me too. She's my wife." He let that sit. "Why don't you get some rest, and we can talk properly when Serena is awake and we have more information." He walked back down the corridor toward the window seat he had claimed 6 hours ago. Damien watched him go. Alara came to stand beside him, not close, not touching, but within speaking distance. "He knows how to do that," she said quietly. "That's not an accident. That's practice." Damien said nothing. "The man I just watched," she said, performed that conversation. Every word was placed. Did you notice he never asked a single question about her medical status? A husband who came home to find his wife unconscious on the kitchen floor, who's been sitting in a hospital for 6 hours. And he didn't ask you once how she was doing. He told you. He controlled the information flow the entire time. Damien's hands, at his sides, had closed into fists sometime in the last 30 seconds. He opened them slowly, deliberately. She watched it happen. "I need to make a call," he said. He walked to the elevator. The doors had barely closed when Alara's pager went off. She looked down at it. The message was from the day shift charge nurse. "Administration requesting your presence. Gerald Marsh's office. ASAP." She stood in the empty corridor for a moment. She pulled out the notebook. She had 47 minutes left on her shift. She wrote the time, wrote corridor confrontation observed, AW behavioral pattern, information control, emotional deflection, 0 direct inquiry, patient status, and then she put the notebook in her scrub pocket and went to find out what Gerald Marsh wanted. His office was on the 2nd floor, a room that managed to be both overcrowded with administrative plaques and somehow entirely without personality. Gerald himself was behind his desk, looking the way he always looked, like a man who was one difficult conversation away from a stress response. Victoria Hale was sitting in the chair to the right of his desk with her portfolio open on her knee. Alara came in and stood. She did not sit down. She had learned, a long time ago, that sitting down in rooms like this was the first concession. "Alara," Gerald said, "thank you for coming so quickly." He had the habit of expressing gratitude for things that were not voluntary. "We wanted to have a conversation about your conduct last night." "My conduct," she said. "There are concerns," Victoria said. She had a precise, neutral speaking voice, the kind that had been sanded of everything regional. "About the appropriateness of sharing patient information with non-authorized parties." Alara looked at her. "I spoke with the patient's family members," she said, "which is within standard care protocol for an unconscious patient whose next of kin has arrived." "You shared specific details about the patient's injuries," Victoria said. "I'm curious how you'd know what I shared," Alara said. A brief silence. "The concern," Gerald said quickly, "is about appropriate boundaries, about making sure the patient's privacy is protected and that Mrs. Whitmore's privacy," Alara said, "is best protected by accurate documentation and transparent communication with her immediate family." She looked at Victoria directly. "Are you a member of her immediate family?" Victoria's expression did not change, but something in the air between them changed. "I represent the family's interests," Victoria said. "Do you represent Serena's interests?" Alara said. "Or Adrian's?" The silence that followed was different from the previous one. It had weight and texture and a distinct temperature. Gerald opened his mouth. "That's not," he began. "I want to be very clear," Alara said, "about what my documentation contains so there's no misunderstanding. My nursing notes record clinical observations made during the direct care of a patient. Those observations are consistent with my professional training and with the standards of care required by my licensure. She paused. If there is pressure being applied to alter, restrict, or selectively exclude those observations from the official record, I need that pressure documented in writing, with the name and position of whoever is requesting it. Gerald had gone slightly gray. Victoria was looking at Alara with an expression that was not quite readable. Not quite anger, not quite respect. Something that occupied the complicated space between the two. "Nobody is asking you to alter anything," Gerald said. His voice had a faint quality of desperation now, the sound of a man who had thought this meeting would go differently. "Good," Alara said. "Then I'll continue doing my job." She left the office. In the elevator going back up, she stood with her eyes closed and her hand braced against the wall and let herself feel the shake that she had not allowed in Gerald's office. It moved through her hands first, a fine tremor she recognized as the body processing what the mind had been too busy to deal with, and she breathed through it in 4 counts and let it go. When the doors opened, Marcus Vale was standing in the 3rd-floor corridor. She had never seen him before, but she knew from the way he was standing, slightly apart from the other visitors, angled toward the nurse's station, eyes moving, that he was not there for personal reasons. He was there because someone had sent him. He saw her come off the elevator and cross to meet her with the unhurried efficiency of someone who had done this kind of work for a long time. "Alara Voss?" he said. "Yes." "Marcus Vale. I work for Damien Cross." He said it plainly, without preamble. He'd like a conversation. Tonight. He says he wants to show you something he found. She looked at him. "Show me what?" she said. "He didn't tell me." A pause. "He just said you'd want to see it." She thought about the notebook in her pocket. She thought about the hollow chart entry from 14 months ago. She thought about the way Adrian Whitmore had smiled at the end of that corridor conversation. Small and controlled and absolutely certain. She thought about Serena Whitmore's arm on the blanket. "Tell him 7 o'clock, she said. Marcus Vale nodded and walked back to the elevator. Alara stood in the corridor and looked at the closed door of Serena's room and understood, with the particular clarity that came when exhaustion burned through the last of the insulating cushion between a person and the truth, that the night she had just come through was not the hard part. The hard part was still coming. And somewhere inside that room, Serena Whitmore lay unconscious, carrying a child, with no idea that the men who both claimed to love her were circling each other in the corridors, and that the only person who had so far written down the truth was a night shift nurse with aching feet and a small black notebook, standing alone in the fluorescent light, deciding whether to walk into the center of something she could not yet see the edges of. She walked back to the nurse's station. She picked up her pen. She kept going. She slept 4 hours. That was all she allowed herself. Alara drove home at 8:20 a.m. with the windows down because the air inside the car felt used up, changed into street clothes, set an alarm for noon, and lay down on top of her made bed with her shoes still on. She was unconscious in under 3 minutes. When the alarm pulled her back up, she lay still for a moment with her eyes open, looking at the ceiling, letting the events of the previous night reassemble themselves in the correct order. She did this deliberately, the way she always did after a difficult shift. Not rushing it, not looking away from any part of it, just letting it settle into its actual shape before she had to act on it again. Then she got up, washed her face, ate something she wouldn't remember eating, and drove back. Damien Cross was already at the restaurant when she arrived at 7:02 p.m. It was a small place in Midtown, the kind with dark wood booths and lighting that had been calibrated for privacy rather than atmosphere. He was at a corner table, not facing the room, which surprised her, given what she had assessed of him. And then she noticed the man positioned near the door and understood that Damien Cross did not need to face the room himself. Marcus Vale was not present. Damien stood when she approached. Old habit, she registered, or something performing old habit. He gestured to the seat across from him. She sat. There was a folder on the table between them. Thin, brown, nothing written on the outside. Neither of them reached for it immediately. "You went home," he said. "I worked a 12-hour overnight shift," she said. "I needed 4 hours. I didn't sleep." "I can see that. He looked, in the artificial dimness of the restaurant, like a man who had spent the daylight hours doing something that had cost him without showing it. The shadows under his eyes were not new. She didn't think Damien Cross was a man who slept 8 hours under normal circumstances. But they were deeper now, and the careful arrangement of his composure had the quality of something that had been reconstructed after coming apart. "Tell me what's in the folder," she said, "before I look at it." He looked at her for a moment. Then he put his hand flat on top of the folder, not opening it. 14 months ago, he said, Serena was treated at a private clinic in Memorial. Not here, a private facility outside the hospital system. Dr. Philip Arden. The clinic handles high-end clients who want their medical situations kept off the main hospital record. He paused. Arden is on Adrian's personal retainer. Has been for 6 years. Alara held very still. She came in with a fractured wrist, Damien said. Hairline fracture, radial styloid, consistent with the defensive injury, the kind you get when you put your arm up to block something. His jaw moved. Arden documented it as a sports injury. Tennis. He noted she had been playing competitively. He let a breath out. Serena has never played tennis. Not once in her life. The information landed in the way that bad information always landed. Not explosively, but with the particular weight of something that made everything already known rearrange itself into a more terrible configuration. "How did you get this?" she asked. "Marcus found the clinic. It took him most of the day." A pause. "I have resources." "The chart is from 14 months ago," she said slowly. "The gap in Serena's hospital record, the hollow entry I found last night. Adrian had the original consultation note filed at Houston Memorial to create a paper trail showing she was seen," Damien said, without any specifics that could raise questions. "He controls what Arden documents and where. He's been doing it for a long time." He removed his hand from the folder. "There's more." She opened the folder. The first document was a copy of Arden's clinical notes, 3 pages, written in the particular compact shorthand of private practice medicine. She read it quickly. The tennis narrative was complete and detailed. Date of injury, mechanism, recommended treatment. Neat, seamless. The kind of lie that worked because it was proportionate, not overwrought, not suspiciously detailed, just enough. The second document was a financial record. She studied it without speaking. A series of transfers, corporate account to corporate account, money moving through 2 intermediary LLC structures before arriving at Arden's clinic's operating account. Regular. Quarterly. The amounts were not enormous. They were exactly the size of payments that were meant to look like retainer fees. The third document was a photograph. It was printed on plain paper, a copy of something digital, slightly degraded in quality but clear enough. It showed Serena Whitmore seated in a restaurant, a glass of water in front of her, wearing a long-sleeved blouse in what looked like summer. Her posture in the photograph was the posture of someone who had learned to hold themselves in a specific way. Shoulders slightly inward, head at a particular angle, occupying minimal space. Alara recognized that posture not because she had clinical training in it, but because she had seen it before, in other women, in the particular physical vocabulary that developed when someone had spent time making themselves smaller. The photograph was dated 13 months ago. "Where did you get this?" she asked. "A restaurant near River Oaks." Marcus pulled their security archive. His voice was very flat. "Look at her left wrist." Alara looked. Beneath the edge of the long sleeve, just visible where the cuff had shifted, was the shadow of a brace. Medical. The kind worn during recovery from a fracture. She set the photograph down. The silence at the table was dense. "He's been doing this for at least 14 months that we can document," Damien said. "Probably longer." He stopped, started again. "She was wearing long sleeves in July." Alara did not say anything. She understood the full weight of what he had just said, not the factual content of it, which was already devastating enough, but the specific quality of the pain underneath it. He had spent the day building a case against a man he had chosen, against a man he had trusted with the most important thing he had. "I vetted him," Damien said again. It came out differently than it had the first time, in the waiting room that morning. Then it had been a statement of defense. Now it was something closer to a wound being pressed. He kept it off the grid deliberately, Ilara said. Private clinic, controlled documentation, corporate payment structures. He built a system. She paused. You can't vet what doesn't exist on paper. Damien's eyes moved to the window beside the table. Outside, Houston moved through its evening, cars and streetlights, and the ordinary noise of a city that didn't know or care about what was happening in this particular dark booth. I should have seen it, he said. She didn't tell you, Ilara said. That's not an accident either. He made sure she didn't. How? She looked at him directly. He used you, she said. He used your reputation, your life. Whatever the specifics were, I'm willing to bet that part of the control he had over her involved making her believe that telling you would make things worse, that it would put her in the middle of something more dangerous than staying silent. The change that moved through Damien's face in the next 3 seconds was the most unguarded thing she had seen from him. It was not grief exactly, and it was not rage exactly. It lived in the space between them, in the exact location where a man discovered that the weapons he had built to protect someone had been turned around and aimed at her. He said nothing. He looked at the photograph. She needs you to be steady, Ilara said quietly. Whatever you feel right now, and I understand what you feel, she needs the person across the table from me to be the version of you that thinks before it moves. She held his gaze. Can you be that? He looked at her for a long time. I don't know, he said. It was, she thought, the most honest thing he had said to her. Then that's where we start, she said. She collected the documents, ordered them carefully, and placed them back in the folder. She kept the folder on her side of the table. I need to go back tonight, she said. Serena may be conscious by now, or close to it. If she is, and if she's willing to talk, her testimony matters more than anything in this folder. Physical evidence without testimony gets challenged. Testimony without physical evidence gets dismissed. We need both. She won't talk, Damien said, immediate, certain. She's been protecting this secret for over a year, maybe longer. She won't just... She might, Ilara said, if the right person is in the room with her. Someone she trusts enough to believe that speaking won't destroy everything. I should be the one... No. She said it quietly, but with no flexibility in it. Not yet. She has to come to that herself. If you walk in there first, the first thing she'll feel is the weight of what she thinks she owes you, the guilt of having kept it, and the terror of what she thinks you'll do. She paused. Let me go first. If she's ready to talk, I'll come get you. He hated it. She could see him hating it. The removal of agency from a man whose entire architecture was built on action and control and the immediate application of force to problems. Asking Damien Cross to wait in a corridor while someone else handled something critical was like asking a river to stop moving. But he nodded. She left the restaurant at 7:48 p.m. and drove back to Houston Memorial under a sky that had gone the particular bruised purple of late evening, and she was halfway through the parking structure when her phone buzzed. It was Danny. She picked up before the second buzz. She's awake, he said. Has been for about 40 minutes. She's asking for water and she won't talk to anyone. A pause. Adrian's been in the room for the last 20 minutes. I can't get him out. She hasn't asked him to leave. Ilara's hand tightened on the phone. I'm in the parking structure, she said. I'll be there in 4 minutes. One more thing, Danny said. His voice dropped. Security footage from the private corridor near Serena's room, the segment between 2 and 4 a.m. It's gone. Server shows it was accessed and overwritten at 6:15 this morning. A beat. Victoria Hale badged into the security office at 6:08. Ilara stood in the parking structure with the phone at her ear and the concrete cold at her back and let that settle. Okay, she said. Okay, Danny said. I'm coming up, she said. Don't let anyone else into that room. She took the stairs. Adrian Whitmore was seated beside Serena's bed when Ilara came through the door without knocking. He looked up without surprise, or rather, with the version of surprise he had decided to perform, which arrived a half-second late and sat slightly wrong on his face. Serena was awake. It was the first time Ilara had seen her eyes open, and the first thing she registered was that they were dark and deep-set and very, very tired. Not the tiredness of someone who had just regained consciousness, the tiredness of someone who had been tired for a long time and had simply added this particular ordeal to the existing weight. She looked at Alara. Adrian said, "Visiting hours?" "I'm her nurse," Alara said. She moved to the monitoring station on the left side of the bed, put her back to Adrian, and focused on Serena. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm Alara Voss. I've been your nurse since last night. How are you feeling?" Serena's eyes moved to Adrian and then back to Alara. "Thirsty?" she said. Her voice was rough from disuse. "I'll get you water." Alara poured from the pitcher on the bedside table, handed the cup, and watched Serena's hands as they wrapped around it. The left hand, the wrist. The tendons moved normally. The fracture from 14 months ago had healed. But the muscle memory of the injury was still there, she thought, in the careful way Serena held the cup slightly off-center, unconsciously distributing the weight. "She needs rest," Adrian said from his chair. "She just woke up. This isn't the time for—" "Mr. Whitmore," Alara said without turning, "I need to check her vitals and do a brief assessment. That's standard post-recovery procedure. It'll take about 10 minutes. You're welcome to wait outside." A silence. "I'm staying," Adrian said. "That's your choice," Alara said. She turned to him then, and she looked at him with the full measure of professional composure she had spent 11 years building, and she said, "Then please don't interrupt the assessment." She turned back to Serena. As she worked, blood pressure cuff, pulse ox, fetal monitor check, the ordinary choreography of care, she spoke to Serena in the calm, matter-of-fact tone she used for every patient, narrating each step, and beneath the narration she watched Serena's face with the specific attention she had given it when she first came through those doors the previous night. The way her eyes moved, the way her breathing changed when Adrian shifted in his chair, the almost imperceptible tension that moved through her shoulders at the sound of his voice. When Alara finished the assessment, she made her notations, capped her pen, and said to Serena, "Everything looks good? The baby's doing well." She paused. "Is there anything you need? Anything you want to tell me?" She said the second question exactly the way she had said the first. Same tone, same weight, nothing to distinguish it for Adrian, who was watching from 6 feet away. Serena looked at her. Something moved through her eyes. A rapid, private calculation, the kind done by someone who had learned to make these calculations in fractions of seconds. "No," Serena said. "All right." Alara picked up the chart. "I'll check back in an hour." She moved toward the door, stopped with her hand on the frame, and without looking at Adrian said, "Mr. Whitmore, the attending physician would like to speak with you at the nurse's station, when you have a moment." She felt rather than saw the brief suspension of his attention, the half-second assessment of whether this was a real request or a maneuver. She kept her posture easy, her back to him, and waited. "Of course," he said. The chair moved. He came out of the room. The moment the door clicked shut, she turned to Danny, who was at the nurse's station 3 feet away, and gave him one look. He understood it and came around the desk and walked Adrian Whitmore toward the corridor with a question about paperwork, and Alara went back through Serena's door. She had maybe 5 minutes, possibly less. She came to the side of the bed and sat in the chair Adrian had vacated and leaned forward with her forearms on her knees. Not the nurse posture, not the clinical distance, just 2 people in a room. And she looked at Serena directly. "I know you said no," she said. "You don't have to say anything. But I need you to know what I know, and then whatever you decide is yours to decide." Serena was very still. "I found the layered bruising on your arm last night. I documented it before anyone could ask me not to." Alara kept her voice low and level. "This morning I found the gap in your hospital record from 14 months ago." She watched Serena's face as each piece landed. "And tonight I saw Dr. Arden's clinical notes from the private clinic, the fractured wrist, the tennis story." Serena's eyes closed. They stayed closed for a long time. When they opened, what was in them was not surprise. There was no shock in her face, no reorientation. There was only the particular exhaustion of a person who has been waiting for a specific thing to happen and can finally, at enormous cost, stop waiting. He told me no one would believe me, Serena said. Her voice was very quiet. He said I had no money of my own, no career, nothing in my name. He said if I tried to leave, he'd have me declared unfit. She stopped. He said he'd use Damien. Use him how? In court. His criminal record. His associates. Adrian said any judge would take one look at who my family was and decide I was an unfit environment for a child. Her hand moved to her belly without her seeming to notice. He said Damien would destroy everything trying to protect me, and the baby would end up with him. Alara sat with that. How long? She said. The wrist was the third time. Serena's voice had gone to the flat steadiness of someone reciting something they have rehearsed surviving. The first was 18 months ago. Before that, he'd never touched me. And then one night he did. And the next morning he was so... She stopped. It doesn't matter what he was the next morning. It happened again. It matters, Alara said. He's very good at being sorry, Serena said. The way she said it was not bitter. It was something colder and more accurate than bitterness. He's the best sorry I've ever seen. And then the next time is worse than the one before, and the sorry gets better to compensate. Her eyes moved to the window. I stayed because I thought I could manage it. Because I thought if I was careful enough and quiet enough, it wouldn't escalate. Because I was 3 months pregnant and terrified, and every lawyer in Houston knows his name. She looked back at Alara. And because I was afraid of what Damien would do. He's here, Alara said. Serena's breath caught. He came last night, Alara said. He's been here all day. He found the records from the private clinic on his own. She held Serena's gaze. He knows. The silence that followed had a specific texture. It was the silence of a person absorbing something they had both dreaded, and somewhere beneath the dread, needed. He'll go after Adrian, Serena said. He wants to, Alara said. He's choosing not to, at least for now. She paused. He's in the parking structure. I asked him to wait. Something moved across Serena's face, complex and rapid, too many things at once to name individually. She pressed her lips together. Her hand was still on her belly. If I talk, she said. If I say it officially, sign something. It changes everything, Alara said. For you, for the baby. It removes his ability to control the narrative because the narrative becomes yours. He'll fight it. He has lawyers, Alara said. You'll have evidence. My documentation, the private clinic records, your testimony. Those are different things. She leaned slightly forward. Serena, the security footage from outside your room was deleted this morning. His assistant did it. That's obstruction. That's a criminal act on top of everything else. And it's documented because the server logged the access. She held the eye contact. He's already panicking. People who are certain they're going to win don't delete security footage. Serena looked at her for a long time. I need to see Damien, she said. I'll get him. Not yet. She exhaled slowly. Get me something to write with first. Alara reached into her scrub pocket and pulled out the pen she had been using all night, all day, all the long grinding hours of this particular crisis, and she held it out. Serena took it with her right hand, the steadier one. Alara turned to the rolling table beside the bed, found the patient notepad kept there for families to leave messages, and set it in front of her. Serena looked at the blank page. She started writing. She wrote for 6 minutes without stopping, in a hand that trembled at first and then steadied, and Alara sat in the chair beside her and did not read over her shoulder, and did not speak, and did not allow herself to look at the door, even though she knew Adrian Whitmore would come back through it eventually, and that 6 minutes was longer than 5 and the margin was getting thin. When Serena stopped writing, she set the pen down. She looked at what she had written for a moment. Then she signed the bottom of the page, a full signature, not a scrawl, and folded the paper in half and held it out to Alara. Don't let him see that, she said. Alara took it. She folded it again and put it in her chest pocket inside, against her body. She was standing up from the chair when the door opened. Adrian Whitmore came back into the room, and he looked at the two of them. At Serena's face, at Alara's standing position, at the rolling table and the notepad on it, and something in his expression shifted. It was very small and very fast, there and then controlled, but Alara saw it, and she saw him see that she had seen it. And in that fraction of a second, the particular pretense they had both been maintaining, the performance of a nurse doing her job and a concerned husband doing his, cracked cleanly down the middle. He looked at the notepad on the rolling table. "What is that?" he said. "Patient notes," Alara said. She moved the notepad off the table and tucked it under her arm with the casual efficiency of someone tidying up. "That's not a medical form," he said. "Mr. Whitmore." "Give it to me." The room went very quiet. Serena's hand was tight on the bed rail. She was not looking at Adrian. She was looking at Alara with the fixed intensity of a person watching the only exit. Adrian crossed the room toward Alara with the smooth, unhurried movement of a man who was absolutely certain that his size and his position and the entire infrastructure of his life entitled him to whatever he had decided to take. And Alara did not step back, and she did not step forward. She simply stood where she was with the notepad under her arm and looked at him. "If you touch me or that notepad," she said, "this room has a monitor that shows a continuous vital feed with timestamp, a call button with an audio log, and a nursing station 12 feet down the hall with 3 staff on shift." He stopped. He was 18 inches from her face. He was, she thought, a man who had never been told no by someone who was not afraid of him, and the experience was doing something to the careful architecture of his composure that all his years of practice had not prepared for. "Get out of this room," he said. "I'll be back to check on Mrs. Whitmore in an hour," Alara said. "As I told her." She walked out. In the corridor, she moved fast, not running, and turned the corner to the stairwell door and pushed through it and went down one flight and stopped on the landing. She pressed her back against the wall and put one hand over the chest pocket where Serena's folded statement was sitting against her sternum. Her phone was already in her other hand. She called Damien. He picked up on the first ring. "She wrote a statement," Alara said. "Signed it. She wants to see you." A breath. "But we have another problem." "Tell me," he said. "When I was in there, your phone was off between midnight and 4 a.m. last night," she said. "Were you reachable?" A pause. "I was at a meeting," he said carefully. "Internal. My phone was off by protocol." "Who knew you'd be unreachable?" The pause this time was longer. "Marcus coordinates my schedule," Damien said. His voice had changed, a different quality of stillness entering it, the kind she was beginning to recognize as the sound of Damien Cross processing something he didn't want to be true. "And Garrett Kane has full access to—" He stopped. "Someone told Adrian you wouldn't be reachable last night," Alara said. "Someone who knew your schedule, someone who knew the window." She held the phone tight. "Adrian didn't bring Serena in randomly at 2 in the morning. He chose that window." The silence on the line had weight. "Garrett Kane," Damien said. Not a question. "I don't know that name," Alara said. "But you do." She could hear him breathing. "Get Serena's statement somewhere safe," he said. "Right now. Make copies. Don't put it anywhere electronic." "Already planned," she said. "I need an hour," he said. "For what?" "To find out how deep this goes," he said, and the quietness in his voice was the most frightening thing she had heard from him yet, because it was the quietness of a man who had just discovered that the enemy was not only in front of him, but had been standing behind him the entire time, and was now calculating, with cold and total precision, exactly what that meant. The stairwell door above her opened, and footsteps came down, fast, and she looked up to see Marcus Vale taking the stairs 2 at a time. He stopped on the landing above her and looked down. His expression was wrong, not the neutral professional efficiency she had read from him all day. Something else underneath it now, something that didn't belong there. And in the half-second before she could fully name it, he said, "I need that statement." Alara's hand pressed flat against the pocket. "Damien sent you?" she said. A pause that lasted exactly 1 beat too long. "Yes," Marcus said. She looked at him. She looked at him the way she had looked at Adrian Whitmore in the early morning hours of the previous day, with the specific attention of someone who had learned to read what people were not saying in the gap between what they offered and what they meant. 1 beat too long. Alara did not move. She stood on the landing with her back against the wall and her hand flat over her chest pocket, and she looked at Marcus Vale on the stairs above her, and she counted the beats of her own pulse the way she counted them when a patient's vitals were sliding and she needed to think clearly and fast and without the luxury of being wrong. One beat too long. That was all it had been, one beat. But she had spent 11 years reading the pauses between what people said and what people meant, in rooms where the difference mattered, and that single beat was a room she was not going in. "Call him," she said. Marcus's eyes didn't move. "What?" "Call Damien right now. Put him on speaker." A silence that lasted exactly as long as it needed to in order to confirm what she already knew. Then Marcus's hand moved, not toward his phone, toward her, and Alara was already moving when he moved, not away from him but sideways along the landing wall toward the door back into the hospital corridor, and she hit the push bar with her shoulder and came through it fast and turned left without breaking stride, because left was toward the nurses' station and people and light. She heard the stairwell door behind her. She did not run. Running in a hospital corridor pulled attention, and attention right now was the only currency she had that was worth anything. She walked fast, purposeful, the way she walked every shift, and she pulled out her phone as she walked and called Damien, and it rang once and he picked up. "Marcus just tried to take the statement," she said, low, fast. "He's behind me in the corridor." A beat. Not one beat too long this time. Exactly the right length. The beat of a man receiving information he had been in the process of verifying. "Where are you?" "Third floor, near the nurses' station." "Don't stop moving. Danny's still there." "Should be." "Get to Danny. Stay where there are people." His voice was flat and controlled, and underneath it something was burning. "I'm coming up." She pocketed the phone and came around the corner to the nurses' station where Danny was doing medication reconciliation with the evening pharmacist, and she came up beside him close enough that he looked up immediately and read her face. "Stay here," she said quietly. "Don't ask me why yet." Danny set his pen down. She turned. Marcus Vale had come around the corner and stopped when he saw the nurses' station, saw Danny, saw the pharmacist, saw the two orderlies charting at the terminal. His face was doing the rapid calculation of a man who had made a move and was now assessing the cost. He looked at Alara. She looked back. He didn't come any closer. He stood at the corridor junction with his hands at his sides and a look in his eyes that was not quite threat and not quite plea, but something corroded in between. The look of a man who had made choices over a period of time that had seemed manageable and had suddenly, tonight, stacked themselves into something he couldn't see over. Then the elevator opened and Damien Cross came off it, and the corridor changed. He was moving with a different quality than he had at any point in the preceding 24 hours. The controlled stillness was gone. Not replaced by visible anger. It was beyond anger now, in the place past anger where everything burned cold and clear. He walked straight to Marcus and stopped 2 feet from him and said nothing for 3 seconds. Marcus opened his mouth. "Don't," Damien said. The word was quiet. It was the quietest thing Alara had heard him say. It was the most frightening. Marcus closed his mouth. "How long?" Damien said. The question had no inflection. It was not asking for context or explanation or the particular narrative that made the betrayal comprehensible. It was asking for one piece of information, the way you asked for the caliber of the weapon after you'd already been shot. Marcus looked at the floor, then at Damien, then at the floor again. 8 months, he said. The number dropped into the corridor and settled there. 8 months, Damien said, not repeating it for emphasis, processing it. The architecture of 8 months. The meetings attended, the information passed, the schedule shared, the window provided to Adrian Whitmore on the night he chose to bring his pregnant wife to the hospital and control every variable of what happened next. Garrett approached me, Marcus said. He said it was just operational information, nothing that would... She could have died, Damien said. Marcus said nothing. The baby could have died. The words were not loud. They didn't need to be. They occupied the corridor the way weight occupied a room, not by filling the air, but by changing the pressure of everything in it. I didn't know he was going to... Marcus started. You knew enough, Damien said. You knew the schedule. You knew the window. You gave it to Garrett, and Garrett gave it to Adrian, and you knew what Adrian was. He looked at Marcus with the particular look of a man who has no room left for self-deception about what is in front of him. You knew what he was doing to her. Marcus's jaw tightened. I needed. He stopped. What did you need? Damien said. Silence. What did he offer you, Marcus? Marcus raised his eyes. In them was the complicated wreckage of a man who had told himself a story about his own choices for 8 months and was now in the presence of someone who would not accept the story. And the story was disintegrating in real time, and underneath it was just the bare and ugly fact of what he had done. A way out, Marcus said. He offered me a way out. Damien looked at him for a long moment. Then he turned away. Not explosively, not with any performance of disgust or finality. He simply turned away the way you turned away from something that was finished, and he looked at Alara, and he said, Is the statement safe? Yes, she said. Copies? I need to make them. I have the original. He nodded. He looked at the 2 men who had come up in the elevator behind him, and something passed between them without words, and Marcus Vale was escorted toward the elevator with a quietness that was its own kind of finality. Danny watched the elevator doors close and then looked at Alara. You want to tell me what's happening? He said. Tomorrow, she said. Right now I need your scanner. She made 4 copies of Serena's statement at the nurse's station scanner, and while the machine worked, she stood with her hand over the output tray and her eyes on the corridor and her mind running the sequence of what needed to happen next. The original she folded back into her chest pocket. 1 copy went into the locked drawer of the station that only Danny had a key to. 1 copy she photographed with her phone and emailed to herself and to the address of Serena's attorney, whose name she had gotten from the intake paperwork. A woman named Claire Aston, Family Law, Office in Galleria. The 3rd copy she kept on her person. The 4th she was still holding when Damien came back from wherever he had gone with his 2 men, and she held it out to him. Her attorney's name is Claire Aston, Alara said. She needs to be reached tonight if possible. I know Claire Aston, Damien said. He took the copy without looking at it, folded it, put it in his jacket. She's good. Good enough for this? Yes. He looked at the door to Serena's room at the end of the corridor. Adrian's still in there? He said. Unless he left while I was in the stairwell, Alara said, which is possible. I'm going in, Damien said. She asked for you, Alara said. But Damien, he looked at her. Not a war, she said. Not tonight. Tonight is for her. He held her gaze. She could see the cost of it, could see the 8 months of betrayal and the 14 months of documented injuries and the image of the photograph. Serena in long sleeves in July, in a restaurant, alone, managing a fractured wrist in secret, all of it pressing against the inside of the composure he was maintaining, and she watched him hold it. Not tonight, he said. He walked to Serena's room. He paused outside the door with his hand on the frame, and for a moment he was just a man standing outside a door, and the power and the reputation and everything built around him fell away and left something simpler and more damaged. He breathed in once. He opened the door. Alara watched him go in. She did not follow. What happened in that room in the next 37 minutes was not something she witnessed. She heard it only in fragments. No voices raised. Once the low sound of something that might have been a man making a sound he had been holding for a long time. Once the specific silence that settled when 2 people had said the things they had been not saying for years. She sat at the nurse's station and did her documentation, and she let them have it. When Adrian Whitmore came out of the room, he came out fast. He had been in there when Damien went in. She understood that now. He had heard the door, had been in the room for the entire conversation, had stood in the corner or by the window and listened to his wife tell her brother the truth, with her signed statement already in 4 locations he didn't know about. He came out of that room looking like a man who had been standing on something solid for 4 years and had just felt it give. He saw Alara at the nurse's station. He walked straight to her. She stood up. He came to the station counter and put both hands on it and leaned forward, and she could smell the coffee and the long day, and under it something sharper, the particular smell of a man whose body was processing fear through chemistry. Whatever you think you've done, he said. His voice was very controlled, more controlled than anything she had heard from him, which told her exactly how much was happening underneath it. You've involved yourself in a private family matter using information you obtained in violation of patient confidentiality. I documented clinical observations, Ilara said. You shared those observations with unauthorized parties. I communicated with the patient's next of kin regarding her care. That is within my scope. You're a night shift nurse, he said. The contempt in it was practiced. She could hear that it had been used before, on other people, to produce a specific effect. You have no legal standing, no authority, and no understanding of what you've walked into. I have a notebook, Ilara said, and copies of its contents in 3 locations. Something moved through his face, quick and cold and very close to what it actually was before he pulled it back under the control. You'll be terminated, he said. This hospital needs donors less than it needs its nursing license, Ilara said. She kept her voice exactly level. The board will calculate that. They always do, eventually. I'll sue you personally. For documenting bruises? She said. He stared at her. For documenting layered bruising on a pregnant patient consistent with repeated injury, she said. In a legal context, Mr. Whitmore, that documentation becomes evidence. You suing me puts it in a courtroom. I don't think that's what you want. His hands on the counter had gone white at the knuckles. You don't know who you're dealing with, he said. I know exactly who I'm dealing with, Ilara said. I've known since 1:51 a.m. yesterday. The elevator doors opened. Damien Cross came out of Serena's room. He walked down the corridor toward the nurses' station with his eyes on Adrian, and he walked in the particular way that required everyone else in the corridor to make a decision about where they stood, and the 2 orderlies who had been at the terminal quietly moved to either side, and Danny stayed exactly where he was. Adrian straightened from the counter. He turned. He looked at Damien coming toward him, and to his credit, and it was a cold credit, the kind that didn't earn anything, he did not step back. The 2 men stood 4 feet apart. You need to leave this hospital, Damien said. She's my wife, Adrian said, and she's pregnant with my child, and you have no legal authority to— I have attorneys filing for an emergency protective order in the next 40 minutes, Damien said. Claire Aston is handling it personally. You know Claire. A pause. Very brief, but it was there. By the time that order is filed, Damien continued, the documentation supporting it will include nursing records, a private clinic chart from 14 months ago showing a defensive fracture documented as a sports injury, financial records showing the payment structure between you and Dr. Philip Arden, and a signed witness statement from Serena. He stopped. Let each item settle. And the security access log from this hospital server showing that your assistant deleted footage from the corridor outside Serena's room at 6:08 this morning. Adrian's face had gone the particular gray of a man watching the structure he has built reveal itself as a series of individual pieces that can be removed one by one. That's obstruction, Damien said, on top of everything else. That's criminal. You can't prove— The server log is time-stamped and shows the badge number, Ilara said from behind the counter. She said it the way she said everything, flatly, without heat, as a statement of documented fact. Victoria Hale's badge, the deletion command, the timestamp, it's already been preserved. Adrian turned to her. In his eyes was something she had not seen from him in the preceding 24 hours. Not the controlled assessment, not the performed grief, not the practiced contempt. What was in his eyes now was the unmanaged animal thing that lived underneath all of those performances, and it was afraid. Get a lawyer, Damien said. Not one of yours. One who isn't already compromised by knowing what you've done. He held Adrian's gaze with absolute steadiness. And then get out of this hospital and don't come back to Serena's room. If you come back, the protective order will become the least of your concerns. The threat was not elaborated. It didn't need to be. In the economy of what Damien Cross communicated, the unfinished sentence was always more effective than the completed one. Adrian Whitmore stood in the corridor of Houston Memorial Hospital, and the architecture of 4 years, the financial control, the isolated wife, the manipulated records, the carefully maintained public face of the concerned husband, began to show its age all at once, the way old buildings did when the wrong support was removed. He picked up his jacket from the chair where he'd left it. He walked to the elevator. He did not look back at either of them. The doors closed. Ilara released a breath she had been managing for the last 4 minutes. She sat down. Her hands on the desk in front of her were steady. She made sure of that, she checked, but her legs had the specific exhausted tremor of muscles that had been held tight for too long. Damien came to the counter. He looked at her for a moment. "She wants to see you," he said. Alara stood back up. She went to Serena's room and pushed the door open gently, and in the dim room with the monitors at their steady rhythm, Serena Whitmore was awake and sitting slightly upright and looked, for the first time in the hours Alara had known her, like a person who had access to her own face. "He's gone?" Serena said. "Yes." Serena exhaled, long, slow. The hand on her belly moved in a small circle, an unconscious comfort, mother to child. "Thank you," she said. Alara sat in the chair beside the bed. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "The hard part starts tomorrow." "I know," Serena said. She looked at her hands. "I've known that for 14 months. She looked up. "I just couldn't find the beginning of it." "You found it tonight." Serena nodded slowly. In the corridor outside, Alara could hear Damien's voice, low, on the phone, conducting whatever the next series of necessary actions required. He was already moving, already converting the crisis into logistics, which was its own kind of processing, and probably the only kind available to him right now. Alara stayed in Serena's room. She watched the fetal monitor track its small and steady pattern, the heartbeat of someone who had not asked to be born into the middle of this, and would need the adults around them to be better than they had managed so far. The number held steady. 147, 148, 147. She was still sitting there when her phone vibrated. It was a text from a number she didn't recognize. "Ms. Voss. My name is Claire Aston. I've received the materials. I'm filing in 20 minutes. I need to speak with you directly. Are you available?" Alara looked at the message. She looked at Serena, whose eyes had closed again. Not unconscious, just resting. The particular rest of someone who has put down something heavy and is acquainting themselves with the absence of its weight. She texted back, "Available now." The phone rang in under 10 seconds. "Ms. Voss." Claire Aston's voice was precise and focused, a woman who ran on purpose. "I've read the statement and I've looked at the documentation. I want you to understand what we're doing tonight and what it means for the days ahead." "Tell me," Alara said. "The protective order is the first move. Adrian Whitmore will respond through his attorneys by morning. He'll challenge the evidence. He'll attack the chain of custody. He'll come after your nursing license and your documentation process and every decision you made in the last 24 hours. A brief pause. "He'll be methodical about it because that's who he is. He has resources and he knows how to use them, and he will use every single one." "I know," Alara said. "Are you prepared for that?" Alara looked at the monitor. 148, 147, 148. "Tell me what you need from me," she said. "I need your original notebook," Claire Aston said. "I need a sworn affidavit covering every observation from the moment Serena came through those ER doors. I need the chain of custody for every copy of that statement documented in writing. And I need you on a witness stand when this goes to court, which it will." "When?" Alara said. "I'm pushing for an expedited hearing. Given the pregnancy, given the obstruction charge, I think I can get a judge to move this quickly." Another pause. "But quickly in legal terms means weeks, not days. And between now and then, Adrian Whitmore is going to come at everything you've built." Alara sat in the dimmed room with the monitors and the sleeping woman and the phone at her ear, and she thought about the granola bar at 4 a.m. and the 4 hours of sleep, and her shoes still on, and the specific quality of exhaustion that came not from hours, but from the sustained effort of standing in one place and not moving when every force in the environment was designed to move you. "I'll have the affidavit ready by morning," she said. "Good," Claire Aston said. "And Ms. Voss?" A beat. "What you did in the last 24 hours, the documentation, the chain of custody, the way you handled the hospital administration, that's going to matter enormously in court. Adrian's team will try to make you look reckless. The record will show the opposite." She hung up. Alara sat for a moment in the quiet. Then she picked up her notebook, opened to the next blank page, and began writing the affidavit from the beginning. From 1:47 a.m. and the radio call, and the paramedics coming through the doors, and the man 2 steps behind the stretcher with his hand in his pocket and his composure already perfect. She wrote for 40 minutes without stopping. She was on page 6 when the door opened and Damian Cross came in quietly and stood at the foot of Serena's bed and looked at his sister sleeping. He stood there for a long time without speaking. Then he looked at Alara in the chair, at the notebook in her hands, at the pen moving across the page, and something in his face did the thing it had done in the early morning hours when he'd first come to this floor. Shifted, in the place below the surface, permanently. Garrett Kane ran, he said quietly, so as not to wake Serena. He was gone before Marcus reached his location. Will you find him? Yes, Damian said. The word was simple and certain. And then, she said. He looked at her. She looked back. In the low light of Serena's room, with the monitors at their quiet rhythm and the night pressing against the window, they looked at each other with the shared knowledge of people who had been in the same trench for 24 hours and understood each other in the particular unadorned way that pressure produced. That depends, he said, on what kind of man I decide to be. She held his gaze. Serena told me something in there, he said. He glanced at his sister. She said she didn't stay silent to protect herself. He stopped. His voice, for the first time, carried the raw edge of something that had not been processed into composure. She stayed silent because she was afraid of what I would do. She was more afraid of my response than she was of him. The room was very quiet. That's what he used, Alara said. Not softly. Plainly, the way hard things needed to be said. He didn't invent that fear. He found something real and built a cage around it. Damian nodded, one small motion. I built the thing he used, he said. She didn't argue with it. She didn't offer comfort where comfort would be a lie. Yes, she said, and now you get to decide what to build instead. He looked at Serena. Outside the window, Houston was doing what it always did, enormous and indifferent and full of its own noise. Inside the room was the monitor and the quiet, and a man standing at the foot of his sister's bed at 11 o'clock at night, holding the weight of what he had understood too late, trying to locate the version of himself that could do what came next. He put his hand on the footrail of the bed, just rested it there. Alara turned back to her notebook. She wrote, 11:04 p.m. Patient stable. Fetal heart rate 147. Patient's brother present. Attending to be notified of patient's improved consciousness at next scheduled check-in. Witness statement secured, distributed, and legally received. She turned the page. She wrote the next line. Adrian Whitmore has left the building. She paused. Then she wrote, court proceedings pending. Documentation complete through present. Chain of custody intact. She looked at what she had written. She thought about the affidavit that still needed 4 more pages. She thought about the hearing that was coming, the lawyers that would come with it, the attack on her license and her credibility, and every notation she had made in a small black notebook by the light of a nurse's station at 3 o'clock in the morning while a powerful man drank coffee 20 feet away and believed he had already won. She turned to the next page. She kept writing. The hearing was set for 3 weeks out. Claire Aston had pushed for 2 and gotten 3, which she told Alara over the phone was actually a win given the counterweight of Adrian Whitmore's legal team, a firm called Hartley Crane with 7 partners and a history of turning domestic cases into procedural marathons. They had filed 4 motions in the first 48 hours, a challenge to the chain of custody on the nursing documentation, a motion to exclude the private clinic records on the grounds that they had been obtained without proper authorization, a personal complaint against Alara with the Texas Board of Nursing, and a counterpetition arguing that Serena Whitmore was acting under undue influence from her brother, whose criminal associations made him an inappropriate party to any custody or protective arrangement. Alara read the nursing board complaint on her phone in the hospital parking lot on a Tuesday morning before her shift and sat with it for 4 minutes. It was detailed. It named specific notations, specific times, specific decisions she had made, and framed each one as a violation of patient confidentiality or professional overreach. Someone had done their homework. Someone had spent time building it. She put her phone in her pocket and went to work. The 3 weeks were the hardest of the kind that didn't show on the surface. She worked her shifts. She documented carefully, more carefully than she ever had, every notation precise and time-stamped and cross-referenced, because she understood now that her professional record was a battlefield, and she was going to treat it like one. She answered the nursing board's preliminary inquiry in writing, 6 pages, with Claire Aston reviewing every word before it was submitted. She gave her sworn affidavit to Claire's office on the 3rd day and sat in the conference room for 2 hours while Claire's associate walked her through it line by line, testing every statement against what Adrian's attorneys would do with it. She visited Serena twice during those weeks. The first visit was 5 days after the night of the confrontation. Serena had been moved to a different room at Claire's insistence, a precaution while the protective order was processed, and she was sitting up in bed with a prenatal worksheet from her new OB spread across the blanket when Ilara came in. She looked different. Not healed, that was too fast and too simple a word for what was happening, but different in the way that people looked when they had stopped spending energy on maintaining a specific pretense. The energy was still there, going somewhere, just not into that particular hole anymore. They talked for 40 minutes. Not about the case, mostly. About the baby. A girl, Serena had learned. A detail delivered by an ultrasound technician in a matter-of-fact tone that had made Serena cry for 20 minutes for reasons she couldn't fully articulate to Ilara, but didn't need to. "I keep thinking about what she's going to ask me someday," Serena said. "About her father. About all of it." "What do you think you'll tell her?" Ilara asked. Serena looked at the worksheet on the blanket. "The truth," she said. "When she's old enough for it." She paused. "That her mother was afraid for a long time, and then she stopped being afraid." She looked up. "That's the version I want her to have." Ilara nodded. She didn't say it was a good answer. It was the right answer, and those were different things. The second visit was 2 days before the hearing. Serena was due to be discharged to a private residence that Damien had arranged. A house outside the city, staff who had been vetted, a security arrangement that Claire had insisted on structuring formally so that no one could characterize it as coercion. Serena was calm in the way that people were calm when they had made a decision and stopped fighting the reality of it. She asked Ilara if she was ready for the hearing. "Are you?" Ilara said. Serena thought about it. "I've said the truth out loud already," she said. "To you, to Damien, to Claire. I've said it in a signed statement. I've said it in depositions." She folded the edge of the blanket over her hand. Saying it in a courtroom is just saying it again. "It won't feel like that," Ilara said. "He'll be there." "I know. His lawyers will try to make it feel like you're the one on trial. Claire warned me." "She's right." Serena looked at her with the dark, tired, clear eyes that Ilara had first seen open on the evening of the second day. "Have you ever testified before?" she asked. "Once," Ilara said. "Different circumstances. Long time ago." "Were you afraid?" Ilara thought about it honestly. "Yes," she said, "but it didn't change what I said." Serena nodded slowly. "Then that's how we do it," she said. The morning of the hearing was gray and cool for Houston in this season, a front that had come through overnight and left the air with a scrubbed clarity that felt almost out of place. Ilara arrived at the courthouse at 8:15 for a 9 o'clock proceeding, found Claire Aston in the hallway outside the courtroom with 2 associates and a paralegal, and stood in the group while Claire ran through the order of events with the efficient calm of a woman who had done this many times and had learned that calm was itself a form of strategy. Adrian Whitmore arrived at 8:47 with 3 attorneys from Hartley Crane, all of them in dark suits, all of them carrying the particular posture of people who were paid to project certainty. Adrian himself looked like he had slept. His suit was perfect. His face was arranged into the expression of a man who had been wrongly accused and was patiently enduring the process of correction. Ilara had expected this. She had thought about it for 3 weeks and had prepared herself not to react to it, and she didn't. She watched him cross the lobby and push through the courtroom door, and she registered his presence the way she registered the presence of any difficult clinical fact, without judgment, without emotion she couldn't afford, with only the clear attention of someone who needed to see accurately. Victoria Hale was not with him. Ilara had learned from Claire the previous week that Victoria Hale had retained her own attorney 4 days after the night of the confrontation. The obstruction charge related to the security footage deletion had been referred to the Houston DA's office, and Victoria, faced with the choice of going down with Adrian or cooperating, had made the calculation that people in her position usually made. She had agreed to provide a full account of the record manipulation, the communications between Adrian and Dr. Arden, and the specific instructions she had received regarding the hospital visit. Her cooperation agreement had been signed 12 days ago. Adrian's attorneys had not yet told him how complete her account was. Claire had made sure of that through the strategic timing of disclosure. He was going to find out today. The courtroom was not dramatic in the way that courtrooms appeared in the productions Alar had seen over the years. It was a civil family court chamber. Wood paneling, fluorescent light, gallery seating for perhaps 40 people, a judge's bench occupied by the Honorable Margaret Cho, who had a reputation Claire described as no nonsense and an absolute intolerance for delays, which was why Claire had wanted her specifically. Serena came in with Damien at her side and Claire on her other side, and she walked to the petitioner's table with her chin level and her hands loose at her sides, and the only indication of what the walk cost her was the single moment when she passed the respondent's table and her eyes met Adrian's. It lasted 1 second. In that second, whatever had passed between them over 4 years, the dinners and the wedding and the first months and the escalation and the control and the fracture and the silence and the fear, compressed itself into a look that Alara, watching from the gallery, could not fully read and did not try to. Then Serena looked away. She sat down. The proceeding opened with Claire presenting the petition, the protective order, the supporting documentation, the grounds. She spoke with the unhurried precision of someone who had organized her argument into a structure that would not give the opposition room to disrupt the sequence. She laid out the nursing records first because they were the anchor, the earliest documented evidence, the contemporaneous notations made before anyone could argue they had been shaped by advocacy. She walked Judge Cho through Alara's timeline from 1:51 a.m. with the specificity of a woman who had read the notebook so many times she could cite the exact phrasing of each entry. Then the private clinic records. Then the financial documentation showing the payment structure between Adrian and Dr. Arden. Then the security access log showing Victoria Hale's badge and the deletion timestamp. Then Victoria's own account, submitted in writing as part of her cooperation agreement, which described in plain language the instructions she had received, the records she had altered, the communications she had managed. It took 40 minutes. In those 40 minutes, the courtroom was very quiet. Adrian's lead attorney, a tall man named Forsyth, whose silver hair was exactly the shade that courtrooms found reassuring, rose and began the counter-argument with the confidence of a man who had prepared a structure he believed in. He challenged the chain of custody. He challenged the authorization under which the clinic records had been obtained. He characterized Alara's documentation as the work of a nurse who had exceeded her professional scope, made assumptions beyond her clinical training, and allowed herself to be recruited into a family conflict by a man with a criminal background whose motivations were not what they appeared. He was good. Alara had expected him to be good. She sat in the gallery and listened and noted the places where the argument had genuine strength, and the places where it was doing the thing that overconfident legal arguments did, reaching past what the facts supported into the territory of what sounded plausible. Then Claire called Alara to the stand. She walked to the witness box and sat and looked at the courtroom from the new angle, the gallery, the tables, Adrian Whitmore's profile, Judge Cho behind the bench with reading glasses and a particular expression of patient attention. And she put her hands on the rail in front of her and breathed once. Claire's questions were direct and chronological. Alara answered each one in the same register she had used for 3 weeks, specific, documented, precise. She did not editorialize. She did not offer interpretations beyond what she had recorded. She described what she had seen, when she had seen it, and what she had done with the information. She was, she knew, the least dramatic witness in the room, and that was the point. Drama could be challenged. Precision was harder to touch. Forsyth's cross-examination was where it became difficult. He began with her nursing board complaint, which was public record. He spent 12 minutes on it, asking her to confirm specific details, using her confirmations to build a framework in which her actions during the night of Serena's admission looked like a pattern of unauthorized advocacy rather than professional care. He was patient about it. He didn't raise his voice. He built the frame piece by piece, and Alara sat in the witness box and watched him build it and answered each question as it came, simply, without the additional context that she was not being asked for and that she knew Claire would address on redirect. Ms. Voss, Forsyth said, you have no training in forensic medicine, correct? Correct. You have no certification in trauma assessment? My nursing certification includes trauma response protocols, forensic assessment, the kind used to determine the origin of injuries. You have no certification in that specific area, correct? So when you documented that the bruising on Mrs. Whitmore's arm was, in your words, layered, you were making an assessment that falls outside your credentialed expertise. I was documenting a clinical observation, Alara said. The existence of layered bruising of two distinct colors indicating injuries at different stages of healing, is a nursing observation, not a forensic determination. I documented what I saw. I didn't determine cause. A pause. You immediately formed a theory about cause, though, Forsyth said. I formed a question, Alara said. That's different. Judge Cho looked up from her notes. Forsyth moved on, but the exchange had shifted something in the room's atmosphere, and Alara felt it without looking for it. The slight rebalancing that happened when a witness held ground that a skilled attorney had expected to take. He spent 10 more minutes on her relationship with Damian Cross. The two conversations, the restaurant meeting, the fact that she had shared clinical observations with him before any formal authorization. She answered everything exactly as it had happened, without softening or expanding. When he was done, Claire's redirect took 6 minutes and consisted largely of asking Alara to confirm specific timestamps and documentation entries that placed every action she had taken within her professional protocols. Then Claire called Serena. The courtroom changed when Serena Whitmore took the stand. It changed not because she was dramatic. She was not. She sat in the witness box with her hands in her lap, 34 weeks pregnant, wearing a dark blue dress that Alara had not seen before. And she answered Claire's questions in the steady, direct manner of a woman who had rehearsed this not by practicing performance, but by spending 3 weeks making peace with saying the truth in front of the person who had spent 4 years making truth feel dangerous. She described the first incident in precise terms, the date as best she could recall it, the location, the argument that preceded it, the impact, the morning after. She described his apology in the same precise terms, which was devastating in a way that elaboration would not have been. She described the wrist fracture and the clinic visit, and the tennis story she had been instructed to confirm. She described the financial control, the accounts in his name, the allowance structure, the monitoring of her communications. She described the specific language he had used about Damian, the court scenario he had described to her, the way he had made her believe that silence was the only version of safety available to her. She said all of it looking mostly at Claire, occasionally at Judge Cho, and once, directly at Adrian. That second lasted longer than the one in the lobby. 3 seconds. Maybe 4. Alara counted them. Then Serena looked back at Claire and finished her answer. Forsyth's cross-examination of Serena lasted 22 minutes. He was careful with her. He was too good an attorney not to understand the optics of aggressive questioning of a pregnant domestic abuse survivor. But he was also thorough, and he probed the timeline for inconsistencies, questioned why she had not sought help through any of the resources available to her, and gently but persistently suggested that her brother's influence over the past 3 weeks had shaped her account. Mrs. Whitmore, he said, you've been living in a property arranged by your brother's organization for the past 2 weeks. Yes, Serena said. Your brother, who has an extensive criminal record. My brother, who arranged a safe place for me to recover, Serena said. What he does professionally is separate from what he did for me. Is it? Forsyth said. Or has his involvement in this case, his resources and his pressure, shaped the way this situation has been presented to this court? Serena looked at him. She took a breath. My brother found out what was happening to me because a nurse documented bruises that my husband told everyone were from a fall, she said. Damian didn't coach me. Damian didn't write my statement. Damian sat outside the situation for 3 weeks because he was asked to and because he understood that what mattered was what I needed, not what he wanted to do about it. She paused. The person who shaped this situation is sitting at the respondent's table. He's been shaping it for 4 years. The courtroom was very quiet. Judge Cho made a notation. Forsyth said, "No further questions." Adrian did not testify. His attorneys had made the calculation. It was visible in the 40-minute recess before the respondent's case began, the low, urgent conversation at the table, the moment when Forsyth leaned close to Adrian and said something, and Adrian's face did the thing it had done in the hospital corridor when the evidence was laid out in front of him, the face of a man watching the structure give. Forsyth presented their case through documents and a single witness, a colleague of Adrian's who testified to his professional character. And it was competent and insufficient, and everyone in the room who understood what they were watching could see it was insufficient, and the recess before Judge Cho's ruling was only 35 minutes. The ruling granted the protective order in full. It accepted the nursing documentation as legitimate clinical record. It accepted the private clinic records under an exception for domestic abuse evidence. It noted the security footage deletion as evidence of consciousness of guilt and referred the matter to the DA's office with a formal recommendation for criminal investigation. It ordered Adrian Whitmore to have no contact with Serena Whitmore or any party acting on her behalf. It took Judge Cho 14 minutes to read it. Alara sat in the gallery and listened to every word and felt nothing dramatic when it was over. Not the release she had expected, not the satisfaction of a concluded thing. What she felt was quieter than that. The specific, ordinary relief of someone who has been holding something carefully for a long time and has now placed it somewhere it will be kept. Adrian Whitmore walked out of the courtroom between his two attorneys without looking at the petitioner's table, and the door closed behind him, and Alara watched him go. Outside in the corridor, Serena was standing with Claire and Damien, and when Alara came through the door, Serena looked at her and something in her face moved. Not a smile exactly, but the thing underneath a smile, the thing that came before it. She crossed the corridor and put her arms around Alara, carefully, around the weight of the pregnancy, and held on for a moment. Alara held back. "Thank you," Serena said into her shoulder. The same words she had said in the hospital room. They meant something different now. Not the thank you of someone who needed more help, but of someone who understood the full size of what had been given. "You did the hard part," Alara said. Serena pulled back and looked at her. Her eyes were wet, but her face was steady. "We both did," she said. The weeks that followed moved at the pace of things that had been set in motion and could not be stopped, but did not need to be hurried. Adrian Whitmore was indicted by the Houston DA's office 6 weeks after the hearing. Coercion, fraud, obstruction of justice, and 3 counts related to the financial manipulation of Serena's accounts during their marriage. Dr. Philip Arden surrendered his medical license before the board could revoke it. The civil divorce proceedings began and moved slowly, as all such things did, but moved. The nursing board dismissed the complaint against Alara in its entirety. The letter came on a Thursday afternoon and used language like documentation consistent with professional standards and no violation of patient confidentiality protocols and conduct reflecting sound clinical judgment. And Alara read it once, folded it, put it in the drawer of her kitchen table, and made dinner. Garrett Kane was found in Phoenix 5 weeks after he ran. What happened after that was not something Alara was told, and not something she asked about. She understood that certain things existed in the territory between legal resolution and the older, rougher justice that men like Damien operated in, and she had made her peace with the boundary between those territories and where she stood relative to it. She had done her work. She had done it cleanly. What existed on the other side of that line was not hers to manage. The baby was born on a Tuesday morning, 7 weeks after the hearing. Alara was not there for the birth. She was on her shift, doing what she did, 3 floors above the maternity suite where Serena labored for 11 hours and emerged from them with a daughter who weighed 7 pounds 2 ounces and had dark hair in Serena's jaw. And according to the delivery nurse who told Alara about it afterward in the break room, screamed with considerable authority from the first breath, Serena named her Nora. Alara went to see them the following afternoon, on her day off, bringing nothing except herself, which felt both insufficient and correct. Serena was in a private room this time, under her own name and her own decisions, and she was sitting up in bed with Nora against her chest in the way that new mothers held newborns, with the specific combination of tenderness and terror and absolute physical protectiveness that was its own form of knowledge, one that could not be taught. She looked up when Alara came in, and her face did the thing it had been doing more easily in recent weeks, something open and without management. "Come see her," Serena said. Alara came to the side of the bed and looked at Nora, who was asleep with her face turned toward her mother's heartbeat, which was the oldest navigation system in the world. She was very small. New things always were, which was something Alara had never gotten used to no matter how many years she spent on this floor. The absolute newness of a person who had not been in the world until they were. "She's good?" Alara said. "She's perfect," Serena said. Then, a beat later, "She's terrifying." "Yes," Alara said. "That's right." Serena looked down at her daughter, a long, quiet look, the kind that contained more than it expressed. "I keep thinking she almost didn't have this," she said. Low, not to Alara exactly, to the room, to the particular weight of that particular fact. "That night in the ER, they told me afterward that the blood pressure drop had been significant, that if I'd come in an hour later—" She stopped. "An hour?" "You're both here," Alara said, "because someone was paying attention." Alara looked at Nora's small face. "You got yourself here," she said. "I just wrote things down." Serena looked up at her. There was something in her eyes that was too complex and too earned to be reduced to what people usually said in moments like this. She didn't try to reduce it. "Damien's outside," she said after a moment. "He's been there since 6 this morning. The nurses keep telling him visiting hours don't start until 10, and he keeps saying okay and not moving." Alara looked at the door. "He's not good at waiting," she said. "No," Serena said, "but he's learning." A pause. "That's something, I think." Alara stayed for 20 minutes. She held Nora for 4 of them, when Serena handed her over with the careful, trusting gesture of a woman who had decided to practice trust in small, deliberate increments, and she felt the weight of the child in her arms, the particular, specific, impossible weight of something that was new and intact and had not yet been touched by any of what surrounded it. She handed her back. She said goodbye to Serena, who held her hand for a moment before letting go. In the corridor, Damien Cross was in a chair against the wall, exactly where the nurses had apparently told him to stay. He was wearing different clothes than she had seen him in before. Nothing expensive, a dark jacket over a plain shirt, the ordinary clothing of a man who had not needed to project anything this morning. He looked, for the first time since she had seen him step off that elevator 6 weeks ago, like someone who had slept. He stood when she came out. "How is she?" he said. "Good," Alara said. "Tired. Good." "The baby?" "Healthy, loud, apparently." Something moved through his face that was simple and unguarded and did not need to be named. He looked at the closed door of Serena's room, then back at Alara. "I owe you something," he said. "You don't." "I do." "Then pay it forward to someone else," she said. "When you get the chance, you'll know it when you see it." He looked at her for a long moment. She looked back. 6 weeks ago, she had been able to read him only in fragments, in the pauses, in the controlled fury, in the places where the composure failed briefly and the man underneath it showed through. She could read more of him now, not because he had become transparent, but because she had learned the particular language of how he kept things close. "I've been thinking," he said, "about what you said in the hospital, about what I built." He paused. "About Serena staying silent because of me." Alara waited. "I'm not going to stop being who I am," he said. "I don't know how to do that, and I'm not convinced it would—" He stopped, chose different words. "But I'm thinking about the difference between power that protects and power that traps. I've been thinking about it a lot." "That's a hard thing to think about," Alara said. "Yes," he said, simply. "What are you going to do with it?" He looked at the door again, at the room where his sister sat with her daughter. "Something different than I've done before," he said. "I don't have the specifics yet." A pause. "But I know what wrong looks like now. I knew before. I thought I did. I know differently now." Alara nodded. That was, she thought, the most honest accounting of what change actually looked like. Not the declaration of transformation, but the acknowledgement of a new kind of seeing, hard-earned and permanent and unremarkable in the way that real things were usually unremarkable, nothing like the version stories told about it. "Take care of her," Alara said. "I will," he said. She believed him, not because he was reliable in the ways that most people were reliable, not because his history made reliability easy to assume. She believed him because she had watched him spend 6 weeks choosing restraint when he was built for the opposite, and because the man standing in the corridor with his jacket and his ordinary clothes and the unguarded look on his face when she told him the baby was healthy was not performing anything for anyone. She left. She walked to the elevator and rode it down and came out through the lobby and through the main entrance into the outside air, which was warm now, the front long gone, Houston back to itself. She stood on the steps for a moment and let the sun land on her face. Not dramatic, not a moment of triumph or release. Just the sun and the ordinary morning and the sound of the city doing what it did. She had one more shift before her days off. She had groceries to buy and a leak in her bathroom faucet she had been ignoring for 2 weeks, and a call to return from a friend she had been too busy to call back. She had the small, specific, mundane texture of her own life waiting for her on the other side of this morning. And she found she was glad of it. The smallness of it, the privacy of it, the fact that it belonged to no one but her. She went to her car. She sat in the driver's seat and opened the glove compartment and took out the black notebook she had been keeping a fresh one in since the original had gone to Claire's office as evidence. She had been writing in it the way she always had. Observations, questions, the things she needed to remember that didn't belong in official records. She opened it to the last written page. The final entry was from the morning after the hearing. It was brief. It said, "Protective order granted. Documentation accepted. Serena Whitmore discharged to safe housing. Chain of custody intact." She uncapped the pen. She thought for a moment about what to write, about what the last 6 weeks had been, and what it had cost, and what it had produced, and what the word for it was, the accurate word, the clinical word, the true word that belonged in a record that was not for anyone but herself. She wrote, "Case closed." She looked at it. Then she wrote one more line below that, in the same practical handwriting she had been using since her 2nd year of nursing, Norcross Whitmore. Born Tuesday. 7 pounds 2 ounces. Good lungs. She capped the pen. She started the car. She drove home through the ordinary Houston morning. Through traffic and streetlights and the unaware city, a woman with a notebook in the passenger seat and a faucet that needed fixing and one more shift to work before she could sleep, and the particular, quiet, unspectacular knowledge that she had looked at something clearly and written it down and refused to look away, and that sometimes that was enough and sometimes that was everything.